After a bitter fight with my in-laws at Christmas dinner, my son and his wife stopped speaking to me. Weeks later, on my 68th birthday, I sat alone in the kitchen beside an untouched cake and a table set for three. No one came. Then the phone rang. "Dad." "You have two choices," my son said coldly. "Apologize to my wife's family or spend the rest of your life alone." 2 weeks later, I bought a one-way ticket and disappeared. My son's face turned pale when he finally realized what I had done before leaving. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from. Your city, your country, I want to know who's in this room with me. A small note. This story weaves in fictional elements for storytelling purposes. The names and places are imagined, but everything it's trying to say to you is worth hearing. I want to tell you about the night my son gave me two choices, and I chose the third. But before I get to that night, I need you to understand something. The moment a man realizes he has been invisible in his own family, it doesn't come with thunder. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives the way winter does in Nashville, slowly, then all at once. And by the time you feel the cold in your bones, it's already been there for months. My name is Harold Mitchell. I am 68 years old. I built a construction company from $400 and a second-hand truck. I raised a son I would have died for. I loved a woman for 37 years, who was without question the best decision I ever made. And after she passed, after Margaret left me alone in a house full of her handwriting on recipe cards, and the smell of her perfume still caught in the curtains I held on to, the one thing I had left. My son Daniel. Now I want to be clear about something before I go any further. This is not a story about a bitter old man. I am not bitter. Bitterness is what happens when you swallow your pain and let it rot. What I feel, what I felt on the night Daniel called me on my 68th birthday, with the coldest voice I had ever heard come out of his mouth, was something much cleaner than bitterness. It was clarity. "Dad," he said. And even the way he said that one word flat, rehearsed like he had been practicing it in the car on the way home, told me everything I needed to know about where this conversation was going. I've been thinking. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about some things. "All right," I said. I was sitting in my kitchen. The birthday cake I had bought that morning was on the counter, still in the box, still uncut. I had cooked pot roast, Margaret's recipe, the one Daniel used to ask for every year growing up, and I had set the table for three. I had been waiting since noon. It was past 8 in the evening when he called. "You owe Patricia and Frank an apology," he said. Patricia and Frank Caldwell, his wife Serena's parents. "For how you acted at Christmas. Serena and I have talked about it, and honestly, Dad, we feel like you've been difficult. Like you don't even try." I looked at that birthday cake. I thought about the pot roast going cold on the stove. I thought about the 3 chairs I had pulled out from the table that morning, the way I always used to when Margaret was alive, and the 3 of us would sit down together. 3 chairs, 1 man. "So here's the thing," Daniel continued, and I could hear Serena's voice somewhere in the background, not her words, just the shape of them, the coaching underneath. "You have 2 choices, Dad. You apologize to everyone sincerely, not the way you do it, where you say the words, but your face says something else, or, honestly, maybe it's time you figure out how to be on your own." The kitchen was very quiet after that. I want you to hold on to that moment. The birthday cake. The empty chairs. My son's voice on the phone telling me that my choices were to kneel or to disappear. I want you to hold on to it, because that moment is the center of everything I am about to tell you. "I hear you, Daniel," I said. "I appreciate the clarity." Then I hung up. Now what Daniel did not know, what none of them knew, was that by the time he made that phone call, I had already been preparing for exactly this conversation for longer than he could imagine. Not because I am the kind of man who plans for betrayal, but because I am the kind of man who pays attention. And I had been paying very close attention for a long time. Within 2 weeks of that phone call, I had done things that would make Daniel's face go the color of old ash when he finally found out. I had booked a one-way ticket. I had made certain that every door he thought was open to him was in fact locked legally, permanently, and with the kind of precision that only comes from planning something with a clear head and a steady hand. And then I had disappeared. Not dramatically, not in anger. I packed a bag the way I always pack, efficient, neat, nothing wasted. I drove to the airport on a Tuesday morning in February. I did not look in my rearview mirror when I pulled out of my driveway for the last time. Not because I was trying to be cinematic about it, but because everything I needed to say goodbye to, I had already said goodbye to the night before. The look on Daniel's face when he finally understood what I had done before leaving, when he came back and found doors closed that he had never once thought to check while they were open. That is the story I am here to tell you. But you cannot understand the ending without understanding the beginning. And the beginning starts 40 years ago with $400, a second-hand truck, and a name I was determined to make mean something in this city. So let me tell you about these two hands and what I built with them. I started Mitchell & Sons with $400, a second-hand Chevy truck that had 200,000 miles on it, and a heater that only worked if you hit the dashboard in exactly the right spot, and a name I had borrowed from a future I hadn't built yet. The Sons part Y put that in before Daniel was even born. Margaret thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Harold Mitchell, she said, laughing so hard she had to put down her coffee mug on the kitchen counter. You haven't even got the son yet, and you're already putting him to work. I'm thinking ahead, I told her. She shook her head, still grinning, and reached over and fixed the collar of my work shirt the way she always did, straightening things that didn't strictly need straightening, just because her hands needed something to do when she was happy. You are the most stubborn, most forward-thinking, most impossible man I have ever met, she said. I mean that as a compliment. I know you do, I said. That was 1987. I was 30 years old. We were living in a rented house on the east side of Nashville, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's business, and nobody locked their doors, and Margaret was 4 months pregnant with Daniel. I had been working for another man's construction company for 6 years, long enough to know exactly how it should be run, and long enough to know I wanted my name on the truck. The first job Mitchell & Sons ever did was a bathroom renovation in Germantown. 3 days of work, $280 after materials. I came home that Friday evening with the check in my shirt pocket, and Margaret was at the stove making chicken and rice, and I pulled the check out and held it up without saying a word. She turned around, looked at it, looked at me, and her eyes went bright and full all at once, the way they did when something mattered to her deeply. She pressed her lips together tight, trying not to cry, and then she absolutely failed at that, and cried anyway, laughing at herself while she did it, wiping her face with the dish towel. Harold, she managed. Mitchell & Sons, I said. She walked over and put both arms around me, dish towel still in hand, and held on. I held on right back. We stood in that kitchen for a long time. Daniel was born 4 months later on a Thursday in October at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I held him in the delivery room, and my hands, these big, rough contractor's hands that had laid tile and poured concrete and swung hammers in July heat, were shaking so badly the nurse asked if I was all right. Fine, I said. My voice came out strange, thick. I'm absolutely fine. I was not fine. I was undone completely. In the best possible way. He was so small. That's the thing they don't prepare you for, how small a baby actually is, how it seems impossible that something that small could be the thing that rearranges your entire understanding of what matters. I looked at his face and I thought with a certainty I have never felt before or since about anything, I would burn the whole world down for you. Margaret reached up from the bed and touched my arm. You're going to drop him if you keep shaking like that, she said softly. I'm not shaking, I said. Harold. Her voice was gentle and laughing all at once. Your whole body is vibrating. I looked down at Daniel. He had his eyes closed, his tiny fists curled up near his face. I built a company for him, I told Margaret. Before he was even here, I built it for him. I know, she said. He'll know that too, someday. She was right about most things, Margaret. She was right about that. The years that followed were the kind that don't make for dramatic storytelling, but make for a good life. I worked 6 days a week for the first decade, early mornings, late evenings, every Saturday, and most Sunday afternoons. Mitchell & Sons grew from bathroom renovations to full residential builds to, by the mid-90s, commercial contracts. We hired our first employee in 1991. By 2005, we had 12 people on payroll and were managing commercial properties across Nashville. I missed things. I won't pretend I didn't. Daniel's third-grade school play, I was on a job site in Brentwood. His first Little League game, I made it to the last 2 innings and caught the look on his face when he spotted me in the stands, the way his whole body straightened up with pride, and that look cost me more than any contract I ever signed. Dad, he said after the game, running over with his cap pushed sideways. Did you see my hit? I did. I lied. I had not. But I had seen his face when he saw me. That was enough. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the concession stand, talking a mile a minute about the game, about his coach, about something Tommy Henderson had done in the outfield that was apparently the funniest thing in the history of baseball. I let him pull me, my hand wrapped around his small one. I thought about the company, about the name on the truck, about the future I was building one contract at a time. For him. When Daniel was 17, I sold our first property, the house I had bought and renovated on Fatherland Street, to pay for his college tuition deposit. Margaret had the paperwork ready before I even asked. You didn't have to do that, she said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the signed documents between us. Yes, I did, I said. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, like she was reading something written very small in my face. You know he loves you, she said. You know that, Harold? He doesn't need a company or a house or a college fund to know you love him. He just needs you to show up. I show up, I said. I know you do. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I just want to make sure you know that the rest of it, the company, the properties, all of it, it's good, Harold. It's good work. But it's not the whole of you. Don't let it be. I squeezed her hand. As long as I've got you telling me that, I said, I'll be all right. She smiled the slow, sure smile that she saved for moments when she knew something I was still learning. Well, she said, I intend to be around for a good while yet. She was wrong about that one, but I did not know it then. And on that evening in that kitchen with her hand over mine and Daniel's college acceptance letter on the refrigerator, and Mitchell & Sons with 12 employees, and a name that meant something in this city, I was by every measure that mattered a happy man. That happiness, it turned out, had an expiration date I couldn't see coming. Margaret Mitchell passed on a Tuesday in October at 12 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, with her hand in mine, and the television in the corner of the hospital room, playing a nature documentary she had no interest in. She had been sick for 14 months. Not the kind of sick that arrives with drama, no sudden collapse, no ambulance in the driveway. The kind that settles in slowly, the way a house shifts on its foundation. You don't notice until a door won't close right anymore. I was with her every day. I would get to the hospital by 7 in the morning, bring her the crossword puzzle from the newspaper because she hated the ones in the magazines, sit in the chair beside her bed, and drink the terrible coffee from the vending machine down the hall. We would talk. Margaret had opinions about everything, the nurses scheduling the quality of the Jell-O, the neighbor in the next room, who watched game shows at full volume. Harold, she said one morning, about 3 weeks before the end, when her voice had gone thin, but her eyes were still sharp and entirely herself. Come sit closer. I need to tell you something, and I don't want to have to raise my voice. I pulled my chair right up to the bed, took her hand. Danny, she said. She always called him Danny. You're going to worry about him. Margaret, let me finish. Her fingers tightened around mine, still stronger than you'd expect. You're going to worry about him, and you're going to pour everything you have left into making sure he's all right. I know you. You'll put him first the way you always have. She paused, drew a careful breath. But Harold, you have to promise me something. My throat felt like it had closed around a stone. Anything, I said. Take care of Danny, she said. But don't disappear into it. Don't make yourself so small that there's nothing left of you by the time you need yourself. Her eyes held mine steady and serious. Promise me you'll take care of him. But promise me you'll take care of you too. I pressed her hand to my lips. I couldn't speak for a moment. When I did, my voice came out rough and broken at the edges. I promise, I said. She studied my face the way she always did when she was deciding whether to believe me. Then something in her expression softened. Good, she said. Now go get me a crossword. This one's too easy. I kept the first half of that promise. The second half, that one I struggled with. The hospital released me at noon on the day she passed. I drove home alone on a Tuesday in October, the kind of afternoon where the light goes gold and sideways through the trees, and Nashville looks almost unbearably beautiful. And I sat in my driveway for 22 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The house felt different. Not empty, there were still 37 years of Margaret in every corner of it. Her handwriting on the recipe cards tucked inside the kitchen drawer. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. A coffee mug, she favored the one with the chip on the rim that I had offered to throw away a dozen times, and she had refused a dozen times. The house was full of her, and she was nowhere in it. Daniel came. He and Serena drove down from their place that same evening, and I was grateful for that. I won't pretend I wasn't. Daniel hugged me in the front hallway, really held on, and I felt how much he was hurting too, and I thought at least we have each other. Dad, he said, pulling back, his eyes red. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, son, I said. I know. Serena stood a few feet behind him, a composed, careful woman who expressed sympathy the way some people sign documents correctly and at a distance. Harold, she said, if there's anything we can do. Thank you, Serena, I said. They stayed 3 days. Then they went home. And the house got quiet in a way that had no bottom to it. That first year, Daniel called on Sundays, every Sunday regular as weather. We would talk for 20-30 minutes about the company, about his projects, about small things that didn't matter much, but kept the line open. I lived for those calls more than I ever told him. The second year, the Sunday calls became every other Sunday, then once a month. I told myself he was busy. He was building his career, his life with Serena, the kind of momentum that a man in his mid-30s needs to keep. I understood that. I did. It was around that time that I properly met my neighbor, Maggie Cooper. Maggie had lived next door for 11 years, but the way things go in suburbs, we had exchanged little more than waves over the fence and the occasional borrowed tool. Her husband Ron had passed 2 years before Margaret. She was 65, sharp-tongued in the kindest possible way, and she had a habit of appearing at my door on weekend mornings with 2 cups of coffee already made, as if she had simply decided we were going to be friends and was giving me no say in the matter. The first time she did it, I opened the door, and she held out the mug and said, "You look like you haven't talked to another human being in 4 days." Woon. 3, I said. Close enough. She nodded toward the porch chairs. Sit. I'm not going anywhere for at least an hour. I took the coffee. I sat. And for the first time since Margaret died, I talked to someone who was not my son, not a client, not a contractor, someone who just wanted to know how I was doing and had no agenda attached to the asking. One morning, maybe 6 months into our coffee routine, Maggie looked at me sideways over her mug and said, "Harold, are you lonely?" I turned the question over for a moment. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post and then was gone. "Loneliness is a choice, Maggie," I said finally. "So is everything else." She raised an eyebrow. "That's either very wise or very stubborn. With you, I genuinely cannot tell which." "Probably both," I said. She laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from the chest, and the sound of it hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. Not grief, exactly. Something adjacent to it. The particular ache of realizing that laughter had been absent from your mornings for longer than you had noticed. By the fall of 2024, Daniel and Serena's visits had become rare enough that I had stopped expecting them. A birthday card in January. A text on Thanksgiving. Dinner twice a year if the calendar cooperated. I had adjusted to this the way you adjust to a bad knee. You stop waiting for it to feel normal, and you just account for it in every step you take. I was not angry. Not yet. But something had started shifting quietly, in the way that important things always do. Like a door that won't close right anymore. I just hadn't figured out where the foundation had moved. By the time Thanksgiving passed, and December settled over Nashville, I had almost convinced myself that Christmas at the Caldwell's house would be fine. That I could walk into that house on Belmead Boulevard and smile and make small talk and be the kind of man people are glad to have in the room. I had almost convinced myself of that. Daniel called me on December 21st to confirm I was coming. "Mom and Dad are looking forward to seeing you," he said. Cheerful, smooth, the voice he used for professional calls. "Serena's been cooking all week. It's going to be a good time, Dad. Really." "I'll be there," I said. I found out later, much later, through a source I'll get to in good time, that Patricia Caldwell had said something quite different the week before when Daniel had mentioned I was coming. But I didn't know that on December 21st. I just knew I had told my son I'd be there, and Harold Mitchell does not go back on his word. I wore the navy jacket Daniel had given me the previous Christmas. It was a good jacket wool blend, well made, the kind of thing I would never have bought myself, but immediately understood was exactly right the moment I put it on. I had worn it exactly twice since he gave it to me. I wanted him to see me in it. I wanted him to know I had kept it. Patricia and Frank Caldwell lived in Belmead, which is the kind of Nashville neighborhood that has its own zip code and its own unspoken rules about which cars belong in which driveways. The houses sit back from the street behind old trees, the kind that take generations to grow, and the whole area has the particular stillness of a place where money has been sitting long enough to get comfortable. I had built 2 commercial properties in Belmead in the 90s. I knew the streets. I had just never had occasion to drive them on a December evening as a guest. Their house was on a corner lot, brick colonial 4 white columns out front, a wraparound porch strung with white lights for the holidays. Every window glowed. From the street it looked like a Christmas card, the kind that doesn't have a return address. I arrived at 6:45. Dinner was at 7. I parked on the street because the driveway already had 4 cars in it, and I didn't want to block anyone. I walked up the front path, my breath fogging in the cold December air, and I was just reaching for the doorbell when I heard voices on the other side of the door. The door was not fully closed. A half-inch gap where it had settled wrong in the frame, the kind of thing a contractor notices immediately and a homeowner forgets about for years. Through that gap, I could hear clearly. Patricia's voice first. Warm, polished, carrying that particular southern inflection that makes pointed things sound like pleasantries. "I just hope he doesn't make it into a whole thing again, the way he did at Thanksgiving." Then Frank, lower, agreeable in the way of a man who has made a career of agreeing. "He means well, Patricia." "Frank." A short exhale, the sound of someone setting down a glass. "Daniel married well despite his background. I respect that. I do. But that father of his, Harold, I worry he's going to become a fixture we simply cannot remove. He has no idea how to read a room, and he gets so defensive about that little construction business, as if anyone is impressed. A pause, the sound of movement heels on hardwood. Serena doesn't say anything, Patricia continued, because Serena is gracious, but I can see it on her face every time he starts in about the company. It's embarrassing, Frank, for Daniel especially. Frank said something I couldn't make out. Then Patricia again. I just think at some point Daniel is going to have to make a choice about where his priorities are. He has a real future ahead of him. He doesn't need that weight around his ankle. I stood on the front porch of the Caldwell house on Belle Meade Boulevard in the navy jacket my son had given me for Christmas the year before, and I listened to my daughter-in-law's mother call me a weight around my son's ankle. My hand was still raised toward the doorbell. I lowered it slowly. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. I was not shaking. My heart did not race. I did not feel the hot surge of humiliation or the particular sting of being found out, of having something true and terrible said about you just loud enough to reach you. What I felt was something much colder and much more clarifying than any of that. I felt certain. I had suspected in the vague and uncomfortable way of a man who does not want to confirm what he already knows, that this was the water Daniel and Serena swam in. That these were the opinions marinating in their house, their dinner conversations, their quiet agreements about who Harold Mitchell was and what he represented. I had suspected it. I had not wanted to know it for sure. Now I knew. I straightened my jacket, checked the button at the collar still secure. Then I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The door opened 30 seconds later. Patricia Caldwell stood in the entrance in a burgundy dress, her silver hair swept back, a smile arranged on her face with the precision of a woman who has been arranging smiles for company since before Daniel was born. "Harold," she said, warm as a hearth, "you made it. Come in, it's freezing out there." "Patricia." I shook her hand, firm, brief, professional. "Beautiful home. Those lights out front are something else. Frank picked them out," she said, touching my arm lightly as she stepped back to let me in. "He has a real eye for it." Frank appeared from the direction of the living room. A tall, broad man with silver hair and the comfortable ease of someone who has never once had to wonder whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. He extended his hand. "Harold, good to see you." "Frank," I said. "Good to be here." Daniel came around the corner a moment later, and the sight of him, my son, 38 years old, in a button-down shirt, looking comfortable and at home in this house that was not his house, hit me somewhere below the ribs in a way I was not expecting. He crossed the room and clapped me on the shoulder. "Dad, you look good." He glanced at the jacket and his face did something brief and pleased. "Is that hay you wore it?" "Of course I wore it," I said. "It's a good jacket, son." He smiled. A real smile, the kind he had as a kid, the one that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth. For just a moment, standing in the Caldwell foyer with the smell of pine and candle wax in the air, I let myself feel something like hope. Then Serena appeared at the top of the stairs, elegant and composed as always, and behind her, descending with the quiet authority of a woman in her own home, came Patricia Caldwell, who looked at me and smiled so perfectly that you would have needed to be standing on her front porch 30 seconds earlier to know exactly what that smile was worth. I smiled right back. I had come here tonight to find out one thing, what my son would do when it mattered. The dinner table, it turned out, was where I would get my answer. Dinner at the Caldwells was served at 7 o'clock sharp, which told you everything you needed to know about how Patricia ran her household. The dining room was long and formal dark wood table set for 9 crystal glasses that caught the candlelight. A centerpiece of white poinsettias and pine that probably cost more than my first month's rent on the east side. Everything was beautiful. Everything was arranged. I took my seat near the end of the table across from Frank and unfolded my linen napkin with the care of a man who was paying close attention to everything happening around him. Patricia sat at the head, She lifted her wine glass and smiled down the length of the table. "Family," she said warmly. "What a blessing." Everyone murmured in agreement. I raised my water glass. "I don't drink at other people's tables, never have," and smiled back. The first thing came about 20 minutes into dinner, wrapped so perfectly in pleasantry that anyone not paying close attention would have missed it entirely. "Harold," Patricia said, reaching for the bread basket, with the ease of a woman in her own kingdom. "Daniel tells us Mitchell and Sons is still going strong. The smaller residential projects, there's such a steady market for that, isn't there? People always need things fixed." I set my fork down just briefly. "We moved into commercial property management about 15 years ago, actually," I said, keeping my voice easy conversational. 43 properties currently, 12 people on payroll." "Oh, of course." Patricia waved a gracious hand, as if the distinction were charming, rather than important. "I always mix up the different kinds of construction. Frank, you know more about that. Didn't your college roommate do something in development?" Frank launched into the story about his college roommate. Patricia had pivoted so smoothly that 3 people at the table probably thought she had paid me a compliment. I glanced at Daniel. He was cutting his chicken. He had heard every word. He did not look up. I noted that, filed it away, kept eating. The second thing came about 10 minutes later when the conversation turned to retirement, specifically Frank's golf schedule, and a couple their age who had just sold their house and moved to a smaller place in Florida. "There's something so freeing about it," Patricia said, addressing the table generally, though I could feel the angle of her attention, the way you feel a draft in a room with no obvious window. "Letting go of the big responsibilities. Stepping back. At a certain point in life, you've done your part, haven't you? The next generation needs room to grow without the older generation hovering." She smiled at me as she said that last part. Warm. Gracious. The smile of a woman who had never once needed to raise her voice. "I find I'm not much of a hoverer," I said pleasantly. "Never had the patience for it." Frank chuckled. Someone else laughed lightly. Patricia tilted her head with an expression of affectionate amusement, the kind reserved for people whose jokes you're tolerating. I looked at Daniel again. He was reaching for his wine glass. His eyes tracked across the table, left, right, anywhere but my direction. My chest pulled tight, a slow, painful contraction I refused to let show on my face. This was my son. This was the boy I had bared the day his college acceptance letter arrived. The one whose little league face I had driven 45 minutes to see for 2 innings. He was sitting 8 feet away from me, and he was choosing methodically and deliberately not to see me. I breathed through it, because I needed one more data point. The third thing Patricia said arrived with dessert. She was telling a story about a friend's daughter who had finally convinced her father to let go of his old business and enjoy the years he had left. She told it with great warmth, great appreciation for the father's eventual wisdom. "It takes a certain kind of self-awareness," Patricia said, "to recognize when holding on becomes a burden to the people you love most." She looked directly at me then, and the look lasted exactly long enough to be unmistakable to anyone watching and short enough to be deniable to anyone who wasn't. "Don't you think, Harold?" The table waited. I felt every eye on me, some curious, some uncomfortable, some carefully neutral. I felt Serena's stillness on my left, the particular quality of a woman holding very carefully to a very practiced composure. And I felt more than anything, the weight of Daniel's silence like a physical thing pressing down the length of the table. I looked at Patricia Caldwell, and I smiled with the full warmth of a man who has absolutely nothing to prove. "I think the people who love you most," I said, "are usually the last ones to call you a burden." A brief beat. Then Frank cleared his throat and said something about the pie, and the moment dissolved the way those moments do not resolved, just covered over. But something had shifted at that table. I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. I looked at my son one final time. Daniel's jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on his dessert plate. His hand around his fork had gone rigid at the knuckles, the tendons in his wrist standing out white against his skin. He had heard every word of every exchange. He had understood all of it. And he had sat there and absorbed it and said absolutely nothing, not one word in my direction, not a single syllable of defense or deflection or even acknowledgement. That was the answer I had come for. After dessert, people drifted into the living room. I stayed for 40 minutes, enough to be courteous, not enough to pretend the evening had been anything other than what it was. I shook Frank's hand. I thanked Patricia for a lovely dinner, and I meant none of it. And she knew I meant none of it, and we both smiled anyway, because that is the particular social contract of people who dislike each other in formal settings. Daniel walked me to the door. "Good to have you, Dad," he said. I looked at my son's face. He looked tired, not the tiredness of a long day, but the particular exhaustion of a man who has been performing for too many audiences for too long. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," I said. I hugged him briefly, felt his arms come around my back. Then I walked to my car, and I drove away from Belle Meade Boulevard, through the dark Nashville streets, and at some point I found myself taking the long way home down through Germantown, past the block where Mitchell & Sons had built its first commercial property in 1994. The building was still standing. The lights were off, the street quiet, but the thing I had built was still there, solid and sure, the way good work always is. I drove the rest of the way home with one hand on the wheel, and something newly, quietly certain settling into my chest like concrete finding its level. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was the particular peace of a man who has just received a very clear answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. I got home at 10:40. The house was exactly as I had left it. Lights on in the kitchen. The small lamp in the living room. The particular quiet of a place that has learned to hold only one person. I hung the navy jacket on the hook by the door. Stood there for a moment, with my hand still on the collar, the wool still cold from outside, and thought about Daniel's face when he saw me wearing it. "You wore it." I went to the kitchen, fed the cat a gray tabby named Earl, who had belonged to Margaret, and who had transferred his loyalty to me with the pragmatic ease of a creature who understands where the food comes from. Earl wove between my ankles, purring with great enthusiasm for someone who had been asleep on the couch all evening. "Big night for you too, huh?" I said. Earl offered no commentary. I appreciated that about him. I made a cup of decaf I didn't particularly want and sat down at the kitchen table. The house was the kind of quiet that has weight to it, not empty, just still. On the wall beside the refrigerator, Margaret's calendar was still hanging. She'd had a habit of writing everyone's important dates in red pen, birthdays, anniversaries, doctor's appointments. Her handwriting was small and precise, the kind of handwriting that meant business. I had not taken the calendar down after she passed. I didn't fully understand why until this moment, sitting in my kitchen at 11 o'clock on the night of December 23rd. My birthday was circled in red. January 19th. Her handwriting. A small heart drawn next to it the way she always did. I looked at that circle for a long time. Then I got up, went to the phone, and called Thomas Hayes. Thomas Hayes and I go back 40 years. We met on a job site in Germantown in 1984. I was 27, he was 30, and we were both working for a contractor named Bill Delaney, who paid poorly and expected everything. Thomas was the best tile setter I had ever seen, and a man of almost supernatural calm. I was loud and impatient and full of opinions. We should not have gotten along. We became within 6 months the kind of friends you only make when you are young enough to be completely honest with each other. He left construction in 1991 to go to seminary. I gave him grief about it for a full year before I admitted privately and never out loud that it was exactly the right thing for exactly the right man. He had been the pastor of a small Baptist church in East Nashville for going on 20 years now. He preached on Sundays, counseled his congregation on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and answered his phone at 11 o'clock on a weeknight without complaint. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold." His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who has spent decades learning how to be present in difficult moments. "It's late." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, Tom." "Don't apologize," he said. "What's going on?" I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. Earl jumped onto the table, and I pushed him gently back off. "I need to get some things in order," I said. "Legal things. I've been putting it off." A pause. Not the pause of a man who didn't understand, the pause of a man who understood completely and was choosing his next words carefully. "How serious?" he said. "Serious enough that I wanted someone to know," I said, "before I did anything." Another pause. I heard him shift in his chair. I knew the sound of that chair, had sat in it 100 times in his small office at the church, drinking bad coffee and talking about things neither of us would say to anyone else. "Does this have to do with Daniel?" Thomas asked. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The red circle. The small heart in Margaret's handwriting. "It has to do with everything, Tom," I said. "Daniel, the house, the company, all of it. I've been watching something for a long time, and tonight I finally got the answer I needed." My voice was steady. Not angry, not shaking, just steady the way it gets when I have made a decision that is not going to change. "I need a good attorney. Someone thorough. Carol Briggs is the right person." "You've already thought this through," Thomas said. It was not a question. "I've been thinking it through for 2 years," I said. "Tonight I just finished the thought." Thomas breathed out slowly on the other end of the line. I could picture him exactly in his study at home, the lamp on the desk, his Bible open to whatever passage he had been reading before I called. He was not a man who panicked. He was not a man who lectured. He was a man who listened to the full weight of a thing before he said anything about it, which was in my experience a rarer quality than it sounds. "What do you need from me?" he said. Something in my chest loosened slightly, just slightly, the way a joint releases after long tension. "I need you to know," I said, "and I need you to help me make sure it's done right. Cleanly. If things go the way I think they're going to go, Daniel is going to come looking for answers at some point. I need someone he trusts, who can tell him the truth without flinching." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know I won't lie to him, Harold. Not even for you." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm calling you and not someone else." I heard him exhale again. Something careful in it. Something that sounded, if I was reading Thomas Hayes correctly, after 40 years, like a man deciding to trust the judgment of a friend he respected, even when he didn't fully understand it yet. "Call me when you're ready to move forward," he said. "I'll help you do it right." "Thank you, Tom." "Harold." His voice shifted slightly, just slightly, the way it did when he was about to say something that came from the pastor in him rather than the friend. "Whatever has happened, whatever is happening, you know where I stand." "I know," I said. "Good night, Tom." I set the phone down. Earl had gotten back onto the table while I wasn't paying attention, and was sitting with great dignity in the center of it, watching me with the unreadable patience of a cat who has witnessed everything and judged nothing. "You're not supposed to be up there," I told him. He blinked once, stayed exactly where he was. I left him there. Rinsed my mug, dried it, put it back on the shelf, went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the photograph on the nightstand. Margaret and me, 1981, our wedding day. She was laughing in the picture, the way she laughed at everything, with her whole face holding nothing back. "I had a hard night," I told her. The photograph did not answer, but I had not expected it to. I had learned over 3 years of one-sided conversations that the not answering had its own comfort. She was listening. That was enough. "I think I know what I have to do," I said. "I think I've known for a while." I turned off the lamp, lay down, stared at the ceiling for a while, and then for the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep before the worry could catch me. Christmas morning came at 6:15 the way it always does. I made coffee, looked out the kitchen window at the frost on the grass. At 9:03, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Daniel. 3 words, "Merry Christmas, Dad." I looked at those 3 words for a long time. Thought about all the words they were standing in for. All the words that were not there. I typed back, "You too, son." Then I put the phone face down on the counter, poured my coffee, and began to think very carefully about January. After Christmas, the silence from Daniel and Serena settled in the way cold settles into an old house, not through any single gap you can point to, just gradually, persistently, until one morning you realize you have been wearing 2 sweaters indoors, and you stopped noticing when that became normal. The Sunday calls did not come back. I had not expected them to. What I had not quite prepared for was the texts, or rather the absence of them. In the first week of January, I sent Daniel one message. Short, casual, the kind of thing that leaves the door open without making a production of it. Thinking about heading to Puckett's for dinner. Saturday, want to join? He replied 4 hours later. Busy this week, Dad. Maybe next time. I put the phone down on the kitchen table and went outside to pull weeds. It was 38 degrees. The garden had nothing growing in it worth protecting, but my hands needed something to do that wasn't waiting for a text message that wasn't coming. I worked for an hour pulling dead stems, turning soil that didn't need turning, doing the kind of work that doesn't require thought, and therefore leaves the mind completely free to think. That was when Maggie Cooper came over. She appeared at the gate in her winter coat with 2 mugs of coffee, her breath making small clouds in the cold air, her expression carrying the particular matter-of-factness of a woman who has decided something and sees no reason to announce it. "You're pulling weeds in January," she said. "In 38 degrees. The weeds don't know what month it is," I said. She opened the gate, walked across the dead grass, and held out one of the mugs. I pulled off my gardening glove and took it. We sat in the 2 porch chairs I kept on the back patio, and Maggie wrapped both hands around her mug and looked out at the yard the way she always did, like she found it genuinely interesting, which I had come to understand was simply how she engaged with the world. She did not ask about Daniel. She did not ask about Christmas. She just sat with me, and I was more grateful for that than I knew how to say out loud. After a while, she tilted her head slightly and said, "Harold, when's your birthday?" "January 19th, I said. She nodded slowly like she was filing that away. "You cooking?" I looked out at the yard. A cardinal landed on the fence post, bright red against the gray January sky, and was gone again in 3 seconds. "I was thinking about it," I said. "What are you making?" "Pot roast. Margaret's recipe." Maggie's expression did something complicated, warm and sad, at the same time the way faces do when they are holding 2 things at once. "Good recipe," she said. "Best one I know," I said. We drank our coffee. The yard was quiet. And then, without fully intending to, I found myself talking about last year. "He canceled," I said. "Daniel, last January. I had the whole thing set up, pot roast cake from Elliston Place soda shop, table for 2. He texted at 4 in the afternoon. Said something had come up with Serena's family." I turned the mug in my hands. "I called you." Maggie's eyes went soft at the corners. "I remember," she said. "I brought that terrible bottle of wine." "It was terrible," I agreed. "I sang Happy Birthday," she said. "Off-key, extremely off-key." "And you laughed," she said, pointing her mug at me like she was making a legal argument. "You laughed, Harold. Don't leave that part out." I had laughed, sitting in my own kitchen on my 67th birthday with a half-eaten pot roast, and Maggie Cooper singing Happy Birthday like she was auditioning for something she had no business auditioning for. I had laughed until my chest hurt, the kind of laugh that surprises you with how badly you needed it. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I laughed." Maggie studied my face for a moment. Then she said carefully, "Is this year going to be the same?" I thought about the question, about the table I was already planning to set, about the cake I would pick up from Elliston Place, about the 3 chairs. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm making the pot roast either way." She nodded, accepted that answer without pushing it further. Another thing I valued about Maggie Cooper. She knew the difference between a man who needed advice and a man who needed a witness. 2 days after that conversation, I made a phone call I had been considering since the week after Christmas. Jim Pierce had been my real estate agent on and off since 2005, a steady, discreet man who understood that not every property transaction needed a yard sign and an open house. "Jim," I said when he picked up, "I have some questions about the market. Off the record for now." "Of course, Harold," he said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the house," I said. "Just thinking. What it would look like to sell quietly. No listing, no sign. Right buyer, right price, right timing." A brief pause on Jim's end, the pause of a professional recalibrating. "I can do that," he said. "You want to talk numbers?" "Not yet," I said. "Just wanted you to know the conversation might be coming." "Understood," Jim said. "I'll keep an eye out." I thanked him, hung up, and stood in my kitchen looking at the calendar on the wall. Margaret's red circle. January 19th. 12 days away. I had 2 weeks. The legal work would be done in time. The house question was now in motion. All that remained was the 19th and whatever that day would bring. For the first time in a long time, I was not dreading what was coming. I was ready for it. I called Carol Briggs on the morning of January 6th at 8:15, before the rest of the world had finished its first cup of coffee. Carol had been Mitchell and Sons' attorney for 11 years. She was 54, methodical to the point of being almost musical about it, and she had the particular quality of a lawyer who has seen enough human mess to be unsurprised by any of it, while remaining somehow genuinely interested in every new version. I trusted her the way you trust a tool that has never once failed you, not with sentimentality, but with the deep confidence of experience. She picked up on the second ring. "Harold, this is early." "I know," I said. "I need to come in this week if you can manage it." A brief pause, not surprise, just orienting. "Tomorrow at 2, she said. "Tomorrow at 2, I said. I arrived at her office on Church Street with a list written on a yellow legal pad, 8 items numbered, each one clear and specific. I had written it the night before at the kitchen table in the same way I used to write project specifications for Mitchell and Sons, no unnecessary words, no ambiguity, nothing left to interpretation. Carol looked at the list for a full minute without speaking. Her reading expression was the same as her everything expression, focused, neutral, giving nothing away until she had something worth giving. "How long have you been thinking about this?" she said, finally setting the pad down on her desk. 2 years for some of it, I said. 2 weeks for the rest. She looked up at me over the top of her reading glasses. The company restructuring that was 2 years ago. "October 2022, I said. "That's already done," she said. "It is." Carol leaned back slightly. "And Daniel was never included in that restructuring." "He was not." She looked at the list again. I knew what she was thinking, not judging, just understanding the full shape of what swat in front of her. "Tell me why," she said. "Not because I need to know for the legal work, but because I want to understand what I'm working with." I folded my hands on the edge of her desk. "Their wedding reception," I said. "October 2022. I was standing near the bar getting a glass of water, and I heard Frank Caldwell, Serena's father, talking to one of his friends. Golf friends. The kind of men who talk about other people's money the way some men talk about the weather." I kept my voice even. "He said, and I remember this precisely, Daniel married into our circle well. That construction inheritance of his should set them up nicely." Carol's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "He called it an inheritance," I said. while I was standing 20 feet away, while I was still running the company, while I had 12 employees and 43 properties and 30 years of work behind me. I took a breath. I drove home that night and I called you the next morning. I remember, Carol said quietly. The company was never going to be an inheritance, I said. It was going to be earned the way I earned it. But after that conversation, I realized I had not protected it the way I should have. I nodded at the legal pad. Now I'm protecting the rest. Carol studied me for a moment, the long, careful look of a woman deciding whether the man across her desk was acting from pain or from clarity. Whatever she found in my face, it satisfied her. All right, she said. She pulled the legal pad toward her and uncapped her pen. Walk me through each item. We went through all 8. The will, a complete revision moving Harold's personal assets into the second Sunrise Foundation, a charitable trust he had quietly established 6 months earlier to support elderly individuals without family support. The joint account, Harold would transfer his portion to a personal account and then into the trust. Mitchell & Sons already in a trust structure with Carol and Thomas Hayes as co-trustees alongside an independent third party. The house subject to the conversation with Jim Pierce, which Harold would handle separately. There's one more thing, I said when we had reached the end of the list. Carol looked up. I want a separate fund, I said. Small compared to the rest. Accessible at age 18. Unconditional. I paused. Serena is pregnant. No one has told me officially, but I know. Carol's pen stopped moving. How do you know? I noticed, I said. At the Christmas dinner. She declined wine twice the way a person does when they have a reason they're not ready to explain yet. I kept my voice steady, though the back of my throat had gone tight, in a way I was working to manage. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. I don't know if they'll use my name for anything, or if I'll ever be in the same room as that child. But I want there to be something there for them, regardless of everything else. Just something. Carol looked at me for a long moment. Then she wrote something on her pad. No conditions on behavior, I said. No strings attached to who he becomes or what he does with his life. Just the age, that's all. I paused. Just love, the way it should have been. She nodded once, wrote that down too. By the time I walked out of Carol's office at 4:15 that afternoon, the legal machinery was in motion. What would take weeks to finalize had been set into motion with a conversation and a handshake and 8 items on a yellow legal pad. I called Jim Pierce from the parking garage. Jim, I said, that conversation we talked about, I'm ready to have it. I've got a buyer who might be interested, Jim said. Couple from Franklin looking for an established neighborhood. Off-market, quick, close, clean transaction. You want me to reach out? Reach out, I said. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes after that call. The concrete walls were gray and damp, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Not a beautiful place to sit with the weight of what I had just done. But Harold Mitchell has never needed beautiful surroundings to make a clear decision. I had 12 days until my birthday. The legal work was moving. The house was spoken for quietly. All that remained was January 19th, and whatever Daniel chose to do with it. I was 67 years old, sitting in a parking garage on Church Street in Nashville, and for the first time since Margaret died, I felt completely in control of my own life. It was, I realized, a remarkable feeling. I need to stop here for just a moment, because what I'm about to tell you next is the part I almost didn't include, the part that changed everything. Before I go on, type, tell me in the comments if you want to hear it. I'll know you're still in the room with me. Fair warning. The story from here carries some fictional elements crafted to bring the truth of it to life. If you're looking for something told without that, feel free to step out here with my full respect. I woke up at 6:15 on January 19th, the way I always do, not because of an alarm, but because 68 years of early mornings have rewired a man's body past the point of sleeping in. The light through the bedroom curtains was the pale gray of a Nashville January, thin and non-committal, the kind of light that makes no promises. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a pair of sparrows argue over the empty bird feeder at the edge of the yard. I had forgotten to refill it, which Margaret would have pointed out approximately 3 days ago. I made a mental note to fill it later. Then I started cooking. Pot roast first. Margaret's recipe, the one that required a low oven and 4 hours of patience and filled the whole house with the kind of smell that lives in your memory long after the meal is gone. Then mashed potatoes, the real kind, with butter and cream and none of the shortcuts. Green bean casserole because Daniel had loved it since he was 9 years old and had never once stopped asking for it at family dinners. I set the table for 3. Ironed the good tablecloth, the white one Margaret saved for holidays, and laid it out smooth. Folded napkins. Polished 2 extra wine glasses even though I don't drink because the table looked incomplete without them. At 10 o'clock, I drove to Elliston Place Soda Shop to pick up the birthday cake I had ordered 3 days earlier. The woman behind the counter, a young woman with red hair whose name tag said, Brianna, pulled the box from the refrigerator case and set it on the counter with the careful pride of someone who takes cake seriously. Chocolate layer with vanilla frosting, she said. Same as last year, Mr. Mitchell. My hand paused over my wallet. Same as last year, I said. She smiled and slid the box across the counter. She did not know, could not have known that last year, that same cake had sat on my counter for 4 hours before Maggie Cooper came over, and the 2 of us ate it standing at the kitchen island, because the table felt too formal for just 2 people. She did not know, and I did not tell her. I drove home. I put the cake on the counter. I looked at the table, 3 chairs, white tablecloth, wine glasses catching the winter light, and I thought one more time. Let's find out. By noon, there was no message from Daniel. By 2 o'clock, nothing. By 4, I had eaten a bowl of soup standing at the kitchen counter because the pot roast needed another hour, and I needed something in my stomach. The table sat exactly as I had set it. The 3 chairs, the folded napkins, the glasses with no wine in them. At 5 o'clock, I served myself a plate of pot roast and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, and I sat down at my place at the table, not one of the extra chairs my place, the one I had sat in for 37 years of dinners, and I ate alone. The food was good. Margaret's recipes were always good. At 7 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Maggie Cooper stood on my porch in her winter coat, holding a small bunch of yellow tulips she had almost certainly driven 20 minutes to find in January, her cheeks pink from the cold, her expression carrying the particular mix of warmth and sorrow of a woman who has been thinking about this moment since at least this morning. "Happy birthday, Harold," she said. My throat did something unexpected, a tightening, a brief sting behind my eyes that I pushed back firmly because I was not going to cry on my front porch on my 68th birthday. "Maggie," I said, "come in." She stepped inside and handed me the tulips, and her eyes moved to the dining room, to the 3-chair table. The white tablecloth, the untouched wine glasses, and something moved across her face that she did not try to hide. Pain quick and genuine, the kind that comes from caring about someone. "Oh, Harold," she said very quietly. "The pot roast is excellent," I said. "Are you hungry?" She looked at me for a moment, really looked the way Maggie did when she was deciding whether to push or to follow, and then she took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. "I am absolutely hungry," she said. We ate together at that table, the 2 of us at one end of it, the extra chair and the extra setting still in their places, unused and unmentioned. Maggie talked about her sister's new house in Knoxville, about a book she was reading that she found infuriating and couldn't stop reading because of it, about a cardinal she had seen in her yard that morning that was the exact red of a stop sign. I listened. I ate. And at some point I realized that my chest had unclenched without my noticing, the way it does when you have been holding tension for so long that you stop feeling it until it releases. "This is a really good pot roast," Maggie said, pointing her fork at me. "Margaret's recipe," I said. "I know," she said. "She gave it to me once. I tried to make it." She made a face. "It was not this. You have to be patient with the oven temperature," I said. "Low and slow." "I am a catastrophically impatient person," Maggie said. "We've established this." I laughed, short and real from somewhere in my chest. Maggie smiled at the sound of it, the way she always did, like she had been waiting for it, and was glad it arrived. At 8:47, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I looked at the screen. Daniel. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:47 exactly. I set down my fork, picked up the phone, and answered. "Daniel," I said. "Dad?" His voice was flat, composed, carrying the particular quality of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say, and has decided the rehearsed version is the right one. "I've been thinking about some things. About Christmas and about look. I think you owe Patricia and Frank an apology. A real one, not the way you sometimes do it, where the words are there, but the meaning isn't." A pause. "And honestly, Serena and I have talked, and we feel like you've been difficult lately. Like you're not really trying." I said nothing. Let him finish. "So here's where I'm at, Dad. You have two choices. You apologize to Patricia, to Frank, to Serena sincerely, and we move forward. Or—" He stopped. When he continued, his voice had a flatness to it that landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. "Or maybe it's time you figured out how to be on your own." The kitchen was very quiet. Maggie was watching me from across the table, her fork set down, her eyes steady and serious. She could hear enough to know what was happening. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, and I could see she was working very hard not to say something. I looked at the birthday cake on the counter. Still in the box, still uncut. 68 candles I had not lit because I had been waiting for someone to light them with. "I hear you, Daniel," I said. My voice came out steady and clean. "I appreciate the clarity." "Dad." I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the counter. Maggie was staring at me from the table, her eyes bright with something, fury on my behalf, grief, the particular helpless anger of watching someone you care about get hurt by someone they love. "Harold," she started. "Thank you for coming tonight, Maggie," I said. "I mean that." She pressed her lips together tight. Her eyes went glassy at the corners, but she held it. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to walk you to the door," I said. "And then I'm going to take care of a few things." After Maggie left, I stood in front of the fireplace mantel for a long time. The family photograph had been there for 6 years, Harold, Margaret, and Daniel taken the summer. Daniel was 12, all three of us squinting into the sun at Radnor Lake. Margaret laughing at something off camera. Daniel with his arm around my waist. Me looking at the two of them like I had won every bet I ever made. I took it down. I went to the bedroom. From the top drawer of my dresser, underneath the folded handkerchiefs and the extra watch batteries, I retrieved a photograph I had put there 3 years ago, the week after Margaret passed, because I could not bear to look at it, and could not bear to throw it away. Harold and Margaret, 1981, our wedding day. She was 24 and laughing and wearing a dress the color of cream, and I was 24 and terrified, and the happiest I had ever been in my life. I put that photograph into the frame, set it on the mantel, stepped back and looked at it. Then I picked up my phone and called Thomas Hayes. Thomas picked up on the second ring. "Harold." His voice was the same as it always was, at any hour, unhurried, grounded, the voice of a man who has spent decades being the steadiest person in whatever room he occupied. "Talk to me." "I'm ready, Tom," I said. I was standing in the kitchen, the mantel photograph changed the phone in my hand, the birthday cake still on the counter. "I need you to do 4 things. Go ahead. Call Carol Briggs first thing tomorrow morning," I said. Tell her we're moving on the full list. Everything we discussed. I want it completed before the end of the month. Done, Thomas said. Call Jim Pierce after that. He has a buyer for the house. I've already told him to move forward. I need you to be the point of contact from here. The closing, the paperwork, everything. I don't want to be reachable for that process. A brief pause. Understood, Thomas said. And the third thing, keep a copy of everything, I said. Every document Carol files, every transfer, every change. I want you to have a complete record. I moved to the kitchen window, looked out at the dark yard. When Daniel comes looking for answers, and he will, I want him to be able to get them, all of them, from someone he can trust. Thomas breathed out slowly on the other end of the line. You said 4 things. The 4th thing, I said. Don't tell him where I am, not until I say otherwise. Maybe not ever. I paused. Can you do that, Tom, all 4? The line was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of hesitation, but the quiet of a man taking the full weight of something before he agreed to carry it. Yes, Thomas said. I can do that. Thank you, I said. Harold? His voice shifted slightly the way it did when Thomas Hayes, the friend, stepped aside and something older and quieter came through. Are you all right? I looked at the kitchen. The pot roast pan still on the stove. The 3-chair table with the white tablecloth. The birthday cake on the counter still in the box, still uncut. I'm better than I've been in a long time, I said. And I meant it not with bravado, not with the particular performance of a man who wants to seem fine. I meant it the way you mean simple, true things. Good night, Tom. Good night, Harold. God be with you. I set the phone down on the counter. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the January night pressed against the windows, cold and dark. I stood there for a moment, just standing, feeling the particular weight of a life in the process of being deliberately, carefully changed. Then I reached into the kitchen drawer and took out the box of long matches Margaret used to use for the candles at Christmas. I opened the cake box. Chocolate layer, vanilla frosting, 68 candles in a spiral. I had asked Brianna at Elliston Place to put all 68 on it because Harold Mitchell has never seen the point of a symbolic number of candles when the real number was right there. I pressed each candle into the frosting, one by one, 68 of them, the way I had pressed nails into wood 1,000 times steadily, without hurry, doing the thing that needed to be done. Then I struck a match and lit them, all 68. The kitchen filled with the warm, unsteady light of 68 small flames, and it was, I will admit, a more beautiful sight than I had expected. I stood back and looked at it for a moment. 68 years. Not all of them easy, not all of them kind, but every single one of them mine. I went to the dining table, retrieved Margaret's photograph, the one I had been holding all evening, the one from the beach. In 2015, the one where she was laughing with her whole face. I carried it back to the kitchen and set it beside the cake, leaning it against the fruit bowl so she faced the camera. Then I took out my phone, opened the camera, and propped it against the cookbook stand on the counter, angled so it could see me, the cake, the photograph. I pressed record. I sat down on the kitchen stool in front of it all. 68 candles throwing warm light across Margaret's face in the photograph. The pot roast smell still in the air. The 3-chair table still set behind me. I picked up Margaret's photograph, held it so the camera could see both of us. Margaret, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me a little. You should see this. Our boy didn't come. I looked at her face in the photograph, the laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hair had gone silver at the temples by 2015, and how she had refused to do anything about it because she said she had earned every one of those silver hairs. I made pot roast. Your recipe. The real one, low and slow. It came out right. I set the photograph down gently on the counter beside the cake. I want you to know I kept my promise. The first part of it. I took care of him the best way I knew how. The candle flames wavered slightly in some draft I couldn't locate. But there is a point, Margaret, where taking care of someone becomes teaching them that they can take you for granted. I crossed that line a long time ago. I think we both know that. I looked straight into the camera. I'm not angry, I said. I want whoever watches this someday to understand that. I am not angry, I am clear. Those are two completely different things. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out Margaret's wedding ring, the gold band I had kept on my nightstand for 3 years, the one I had brought downstairs tonight, without fully deciding why until just now. I set it carefully on the counter beside the photograph, in the small circle of warmth thrown by the nearest candles. Then I looked at my own left hand. The matching band worn smooth after 44 years. I ran my thumb over it once. I left it where it was. I looked at the 68 candles. Thought about 68 years. Thought about Margaret and Daniel at 2 years old falling asleep on my shoulder. And the first Mitchell & Sons check for $280. And the way a morning in Nashville can smell like cut grass. And possibility when everything is still possible. Then I leaned forward and blew out every candle one long, steady breath, and the kitchen went dim. I saved the video to the phone, plugged in the small USB drive I had set out earlier, and transferred the file. Held the drive in my palm for a moment, small enough to close my fist around, containing something I could not describe in any unit of measure I knew. The memory box was on the kitchen shelf where I had placed it that afternoon, the old wooden box with the brass clasp that Margaret had used for 30 years to keep important things. I opened it. Set inside the family photograph from Radnor Lake, the one I had just taken off the mantel, Margaret's wedding ring, and the USB drive. I closed the clasp, carried the box to the dining table, and set it in the center between the 3 place settings on the white tablecloth, in the exact center of the table, as if it were the centerpiece I had forgotten to arrange. I stepped back and looked at it. Then I washed every dish, dried every pot, put every leftover away with the careful attention of a man tidying up for the last time. Wiped down the counters. Folded the dish towel over the oven handle the way Margaret always had, just so, with the embroidered edge facing out. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed at 11:40. I had a flight to Book a Life to finish dismantling, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, fear waiting for me on the other side of sleep. I closed my eyes. I slept like a stone. The birthday candles were cold by the time I woke up. 68 little stubs of wax sitting in a ring around a half-eaten chocolate vanilla cake that Brianna had packed into a white cardboard box with a yellow ribbon. Margaret always said I had a weakness for yellow ribbons. She wasn't wrong. I stood at the kitchen doorway for a long moment, chest rising slow, watching the morning light come in through the window above the sink, that cold, gray January light that doesn't apologize for anything. The memory box was on the table where I'd left it. Margaret had bought it at a craft fair in Murfreesboro back in 2003, said she'd use it for important things. I'd teased her, "Marg, everything you touch becomes an important thing." She'd laughed until her shoulders shook, and she'd swatted my arm with a dish towel and said, "Harold Mitchell, you are the most aggravating man I have ever loved." I pressed my palm flat against the lid of the box. My hand trembled just slightly, just enough for me to notice. My phone buzzed at 6:14. "Thomas." I picked up before the second ring. "You sleep." Thomas Hayes's voice was low and careful, the way it always got when he knew something important was happening. "Like a stone," I said. "You." "Barely. Carol called me at 11 last night. Said everything's filed. The trust paperwork went through, the will amendments recorded, and Jim confirmed the buyer signed the purchase agreement at 10:30. A short pause. "Harold, it's done." My throat tightened so fast it almost scared me. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter with my free hand, knuckles going white. 40 years of building something, 40 years of mixing mortar, and pulling permits and losing sleep over payroll, and it had come down to a phone call at 6 in the morning with an old man who used to lay tile with me on a job site in Brentwood. "You okay?" Thomas asked. "Ask me in an hour," I said. He made a sound, half laugh, half exhale. "The photo's ready. Did it last night." "The one from 81. The one from 81, I confirmed. There was a beat, not an empty one, but a full one, heavy with everything we didn't need to say out loud. Because 40 years gives you that kind of shorthand with a person. "I'm proud of you," Thomas said. His voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Margaret would be too. My eyes went hot, and I blinked hard, fast, pressing the heel of my hand against my left eye like that would do anything. It didn't. "Don't do that to me this early, Thomas." "Sorry." He wasn't sorry at all, and we both knew it. After I hung up, I stood there for a minute, with my hand still pressed over my eye, breathing through my nose. Then I walked to the living room. The family portrait had hung above the fireplace since Christmas of 2016. Daniel was 30. Serena was newly engaged, and we'd hired a photographer at Centennial Park. Margaret in a cranberry red coat, me in the old navy jacket, Daniel grinning with his arm around Serena. Margaret had framed it herself, hung it herself, stepped back and said, "Now that's a family." I lifted it off the wall. It was heavier than I remembered. I carried it to the hallway closet, wrapped it in the flannel blanket from the top shelf, and placed it on the floor in the back corner. Then I took the 1981 wedding photo from the bedroom nightstand. Just Harold and Margaret, 22, and 20 standing outside St. Bartholomew's, with rice in her hair, and a look on her face like she'd won the whole world, and I hung it above the fireplace in the portrait's place. I stepped back. "There you are," I said out loud to her. My chest hurt so bad I had to sit down on the edge of the coffee table. Not from grief, or not only from grief. It was that specific, particular ache of something finally being right, after a long, long time of it being wrong. The knock at the door came at 7:15. "Harold." Maggie Cooper stood on the porch with 2 cups of coffee from the diner on Gallatin, her gray scarf wrapped twice around her neck, her eyes scanning my face the way they'd learned to do over 3 years of Tuesday mornings. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one that means you've already decided everything, and you're just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up." She held out the coffee. "Can I come in?" "You brought me coffee, Maggie. You can have the whole house." She stepped inside, stopped in the hallway, and her eyes went immediately to the fireplace. She saw the new photo. She saw the empty space where the family portrait had been. She pressed her lips together until they went white at the corners, and then she said very quietly, "Oh, Harold." "Don't you start," I said. "Thomas already tried." "Thomas doesn't count. He cries at furniture commercials." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet, shining, the way eyes do when someone is absolutely refusing to let themselves fall apart. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." She nodded one single nod like she'd been bracing for it, and now it had arrived and she was choosing to stand firm. "The box?" she asked, nodding toward the kitchen table. "It stays," I said, "right there where you're looking at it, so whoever walks in next can't miss it." Maggie's breath went in sharply. She set her coffee down, crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and touched the brass latch with 2 fingers gently, the way you touch something you know is sacred. "The USB is inside," I said, "and Margaret's ring, and the Radnor Lake photo from Daniel's 9th birthday." Maggie made a sound, then low broken pressed between her teeth, and turned to face the window over the sink. Her shoulders moved. I watched her press the back of her wrist against her mouth. "Hey," I said. "Hey, look at me." She turned around. Her eyes were full to the brim. "I'm not leaving because I'm broken," I told her, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I'm leaving because I finally know what I'm worth, and that's not something to cry over." Maggie stared at me for a long moment, and then she laughed, really laughed, sudden and bright, and completely undignified, and covered her face with both hands. You impossible man. You've told me that before. I'll tell you again right now. She lowered her hands and her face was still wet, but she was grinning wide and fierce. You are the most impossible, stubborn, wonderful man I have ever had as a neighbor, Harold Mitchell. High praise, I said. You've lived next door to some real winners. She laughed again, and so did I, and for a moment the kitchen was warm despite the January cold pressing against the glass. Carol Briggs called at 9:47 to confirm the final document execution. Her voice was professional, efficient, exactly what I'd paid for. Everything's in order, Mr. Mitchell. The trust is active, the will amendment is filed with the Davidson County Probate Court, and the purchase agreement for the property has been executed. Jim Pierce says closing is scheduled for February 7th. Thank you, Carol, I said, for everything. It was my privilege. A brief pause. Take care of yourself. I hung up and stood in the kitchen holding my phone with both hands, and I thought, this is what the end of one thing feels like. Not like a door slamming, more like a door swinging open on a morning you didn't know was coming. I had one more thing to do before I walked out that door. The bag was already packed. One carry-on duffel, the old green canvas, one I'd taken on every job site trip since 1994, sitting by the front door since the night before. 2 changes of clothes, my shaving kit, Margaret's Bible with the broken spine, and the photograph of the 2 of us at Radnor Lake that I'd kept on the nightstand for 31 years. I left the bedroom exactly as it was. Bed made curtains open. There was one last envelope on the kitchen table, white letter-sized, sealed with a strip of tape along the flap. I'd written the name on the front in my best handwriting, the careful, deliberate kind. Mother had drilled into me in the 3rd grade. Serena Mitchell. Not Mrs. Mitchell. Not Serena Caldwell Mitchell. Just Serena. Because whatever else had happened, whatever her mother had said, and her husband had allowed, she was carrying a child that shared my blood, and she deserved to hear from me directly. I didn't leave an envelope for Daniel. He'd already said everything that needed saying at 8:47 the night before. Dad, you have 2 choices, apologize or live alone. I had found a third. Maggie was waiting at the door when I came out of the kitchen. You eat? She asked. Her voice was back to normal, steady, dry, the Maggie Cooper I'd known since the week after Margaret's funeral, when she'd shown up at my door with a casserole and a no-nonsense look that said, I am not leaving until you eat something. Toast, I said. That's not eating. Maggie, I know. She waved a hand. Don't fuss at you. You're already fussing. I'm expressing concern, she said, with a dignity that made me genuinely smile. Then she stepped forward, and she put both arms around me, a real hug, the kind that presses the air out of you, the kind that says you matter to me, and I need you to know that before you go. Her shoulders shook slightly. I could feel her trying to hold it together and losing. Hey, I said into her gray scarf, you've got my number. I know. Muffled, face pressed into my shoulder. And Thomas has your number. Harold. And Carol Briggs has. Harold? She pulled back and looked at me, eyes red-rimmed and bright jaw tight with the effort of not falling apart in my driveway at 10 in the morning. Just come back sometime. Okay? Even if it's 10 years from now. Even if you're 100 years old and you need someone to cut your lawn, just come back. My throat closed so fast I couldn't answer for a full 3 seconds. I gripped her hands in both of mine and I said, I'll try, Maggie. I mean that. She nodded hard several times like she was trying to cement something in place. Then she let go. I picked up the duffel bag, locked the front door, and slid the key under the mat. Not my key. Jim Pierce's contact key, the one I'd had cut for the showing. My own set was already in an envelope at Carol Briggs's office. I took one last look at the house from the front walk. Cream-colored siding, the dark green shutters I'd painted the summer Daniel turned 13, the oak tree in the yard that Margaret had planted from a sapling the year we moved in. The tree was 41 years old now, taller than the house. She'd be pleased about that. 40 years, I said low enough that only I could hear it. Good house. Thomas Hayes was parked at the end of the driveway, in his old Navy Ford engine running heater on. He had the radio set to a gospel station low, just barely audible through the closed window, and when I opened the passenger door and dropped into the seat, he looked at me the way only a man who's known you for 40 years can look at you, like he sees all of it every year, every scar, and isn't frightened by any of it. "Ready?" he asked. "Been ready," I said. He pulled out of the driveway without another word, and we drove down my street for the last time. The city looked the same as it always did: coffee shops, opening joggers on the Greenway, a delivery truck blocking the left lane on Gallatin. Nashville in January, business as usual, completely indifferent to the fact that Harold Mitchell was making the most important drive of his 68 years. I took out my phone. "You sure?" Thomas asked, watching the road. "I want him to know when he finds the accounts," I said. "Not before." "The text or a voicemail?" "Text," I said. "Short, clean." I typed it slowly, checking every word before I hit send. "I found the third option, Daniel. I hope one day you find yours. Dad." I sent it at 11:03 a.m. The phone rang 37 seconds later. I watched Daniel's name light up the screen. My heart hit hard, one single physical thud against the inside of my chest, the kind that makes your breath catch. But my thumb didn't move to answer. Thomas glanced over. "You need to—" "No," I said quietly. "I really don't." The ringing stopped. A voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. I turned the phone face down on my knee and watched the exit signs for I-40 East begin appearing through the windshield. "He's going to be very angry," Thomas said. "Not as a warning, just as a fact." "I know. And then he's going to be very scared when he finds out about the accounts." "I know that too. And then—" Thomas paused. He ran his thumb along the top of the steering wheel. "And then maybe he'll think about what kind of man he wants to be." I exhaled slowly. The Nashville skyline slid past the passenger window, the Batman building catching the winter sun, the Cumberland glinting gray and silver below the bridge. Beautiful city. Always had been. "You know what I kept thinking about last night?" I said. "Tell me." "That picture of Daniel. 9th birthday, Radnor Lake. He's sitting on my shoulders, his hands in my hair, laughing so hard he can barely breathe." My voice dropped. "He was such a good kid, Thomas. He really was." Thomas's jaw worked. He blinked several times, eyes fixed hard on the interstate. "He still could be," he said. "Maybe." I turned back to the window. That's his to figure out. We pulled up to the departures drop-off at Nashville International at 12:31 p.m. Thomas put the truck in park and sat for a moment, both hands still on the wheel. "You call me when you land," he said. "Every stop, I promised. And eat something at the airport, not just coffee." "Yes, sir, Reverend." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned and gripped my shoulder with one hand hard, firm, the grip of a man who's spent a lifetime doing physical work, and said, "Go live, Harold." I got out of the truck. The terminal doors slid open, a gust of warm recycled air hitting me in the face, and I walked inside with my green canvas duffel, my boarding pass on my phone, and 40 years of something heavy lifting off my chest with every single step. I didn't look back. I wondered, walking toward security, how long it would take Daniel to notice. The accounts first, probably by Thursday. Then Carol's office when he tried to call the firm. Then Jim Pierce when he found a stranger's family in the driveway at the house on Inglewood. I wondered if he'd play the birthday video. I wondered if, when he heard my voice talking to Margaret in that empty kitchen on the night no one came, he'd finally understand what the word alone actually felt like from the inside. The security line moved forward, and I moved with it. And outside the tall glass windows of Nashville International, the January sky was flat and white and wide open, and I thought, Margaret, my love, watch me now. The Atlantic is not a forgiving body of water. It doesn't soften itself for newcomers. It doesn't apologize for the cold or the noise or the way it throws itself against the rocks like it has a point to make. and isn't finished making it. But it is honest, completely relentlessly honest, and after 68 years of being the only honest one in most rooms I walked into, I found that deeply comforting. I had been in Rockport 10 days when Maggie called. Those 10 days had been the quietest of my adult life. Not empty quiet. There's a difference I hadn't understood until I lived it. I woke at 6:15 every morning, but instead of reaching for my phone or starting coffee for two, I just sat, watched the water through the kitchen window, listened to the cottage settle around me in the cold. I ate breakfast slowly. I read in the evenings. I walked the harbor path before the tourists arrived, which in February meant I had the whole thing to myself. On the 6th day, I learned the name of the woman who ran the bakery on Elm Street, Clara, with a laugh like a screen door in summer. I was learning what it felt like to be a person rather than a function. My phone rang at 7:03 on a Tuesday. Maggie Cooper. Harold. Her voice carried that particular careful quality it got when she had news she wasn't sure how to deliver. 3 years of Tuesday mornings had taught me to read the geography of Maggie's voice. This tone meant, sit down. Tell me, I said. Daniel went to the Mitchell & Sons office yesterday, and before that, the bank. I set my coffee mug on the table. Outside, the Atlantic was doing what it always did. I had known this was coming. I had calculated 2 weeks, give or take. I had been right within 4 days. The account, I said. Nearly empty, Maggie confirmed. He called the bank first, then drove to the office. The front desk told him management had transferred all inquiries through Carol Briggs. A pause. Carol didn't take his call. How did he sound when he called you? That's the thing, Maggie said, her voice dropping. He didn't sound angry. I expected angry. He sounded like... She stopped, started again. You know that sound a person makes when they reach for something that's always been in the same place and it's not there anymore? That particular shock that's more confused than furious? Yes, I said. I knew that sound. I had made it myself on the first morning after Margaret died, reaching automatically for the second coffee cup. That's how he sounded. Like a man who just realized the floor was glass the whole time, and he'd been stomping on it for years without once looking down. Something tightened in my chest, not guilt, not satisfaction, just that specific pain that comes from loving someone for 38 years and watching a consequence you set in motion finally arrive. Where is he now? I asked. He drove to the house on Inglewood. I saw his car from my front window. A beat. Harold, he doesn't know yet. About the sale. About the Hendersons. I had known Daniel would go to the house, and I had known what he would find. I had prepared for it the way you prepare for a storm you can't stop, carefully, completely, with the understanding that preparation doesn't make the storm hurt less when it arrives. He'll figure it out when he gets to the door, I said. Yes, Maggie said quietly. He will. I walked to the window. The lobster boats were out, small dark shapes moving with calm purpose in the February gray. Was Serena with him? No, he went alone. Good. Some things a man needs to find out by himself. Harold? Her voice went lower. Are you all right? I had been asked that question 10,000 times, usually requiring the answer fine. Maggie asked it the way she asked everything, as if she actually wanted to know. Ask me in an hour, I said. Same as always, she said quietly. Same as always, I agreed. After she hung up, I stayed at the window watching the lobster boats. I thought about Daniel standing in front of the house on Inglewood, that driveway, the dark green shutters, the oak tree Margaret had planted from a sapling. I thought about the look on his face when he understood the house no longer had my name on it. I thought about the memory box on the kitchen table inside. Dead center, impossible to miss. Placed there with the same care I had given every other decision in the past 3 months, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. Some things need to be impossible to overlook. My hand trembled slightly against the window glass. Just enough to notice. He'll find it, I said out loud to the water. He'll open it. And then quietly, in the part of myself I didn't often let speak too loudly, I hope when he does, he understands what I was trying to say. Not with the legal documents or the sold house, but with the ring and the photograph and the video of an old man blowing out 68 candles alone in a kitchen that smelled like pot roast. The lobster boats kept moving. I picked up my coffee, cold now, and drank it anyway. Maggie called again 3 days later. I had been waiting, not impatiently, but the way you wait for weather you know is coming. You stay aware, keep one eye on the horizon, and when it arrives, you're already standing at the window. I was making dinner when the phone rang. I turned off the burner and sat down. He went inside, Maggie said. The Hendersons let him in. I watched from across the street. She told me about Daniel standing at the end of the driveway, looking at the moving boxes, at the unfamiliar car, in the spot where his bicycle used to fall over, at the dark green shutters I'd painted the summer he was 13. Linda Henderson had let him in when he explained who he was. He went straight to the fireplace, Maggie said. First thing, like he knew exactly what to look for. My throat tightened. The wedding photo, Maggie confirmed. Yours and Margaret's, from 1981. The family portrait wasn't there anymore. He stood looking at the 1981 photo for a long time. I couldn't see his face from across the street, but his shoulders... She stopped. His shoulders were doing something. I pressed my hand hard against my sternum. I had chosen that photograph deliberately, just Harold and Margaret young, and certain of each other, standing outside St. Bartholomew's, with rice in her hair. I needed Daniel to understand the family that had always mattered most in this house had been two people in love for 50 years, and I was still carrying that. He found the box, Maggie said, sat down at the kitchen table, opened the latch, took out the Radnor Lake photograph first. I closed my eyes. Daniel, 9 years old, head thrown back, laughing hands buried in my hair, both of us squinting into the sun. He pressed it against his chest, Maggie said softly. Harold. He pressed it against his chest and looked at the ceiling. Something broke open inside me, not violently, but the way old timber gives. Gradually. Completely. And the ring. He held it in his closed fist for a long time. Then he asked Linda Henderson for a laptop. He watched the video, I said. He watched the video, Maggie confirmed. Tell me exactly. He held himself together through most of it. Until you said our boy didn't come and looked at the camera. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pulled it back. Harold, it was the real kind. The kind you can't manage or slow down. I had my arms around him and he just fell apart completely. I walked to the window. The Maine evening was coming in dark and cold, the birch trees bare white lines against the darkening sky. I pressed the back of my wrist against my eyes and breathed through it. He heard all of it, Maggie said quietly, including the promise. Good, I said. My voice came out rough. That's good. He walked out carrying the box, stood in the snow for a long time. Then he looked at my door. You let him in, I said. I let him in. I made him tea first. His hands were shaking. A pause. Then I told him everything. I hope you don't mind. I looked at the dark water through the cottage window and thought about my son sitting at Maggie's kitchen table with the wooden box in his lap and a cup of tea he probably couldn't taste. I don't mind, I said. It was time. After I hung up, I stayed at the window. The Atlantic moved below in the dark, doing what it always did. Underneath the ache, something in my chest shifted. Not relief. More like a door that had been stuck for years finally moving on its hinges. Not all the way open, but moving. Maggie called the next morning. She had made Daniel a cup of tea before she said a single word about me. He needed something warm to hold. She told me his hands were shaking, and I sat down at the kitchen table when she said that. Something about the image of it, my son, 38 years old, sitting in my neighbor's kitchen, with a wooden box in his lap, and shaking hands wrapped around a cup of tea. I sat down and didn't get up for the rest of the call. He asked me what I knew, Maggie said. So I told him everything, from the beginning. I thought he deserved the whole picture, not pieces of it. You were right, I said. I told him about last year's birthday first. I knew what was coming. Knowing it didn't make it easier to hear delivered back to me. Tell me how he reacted, I said. I told him about the pot roast, the table set for 3. His text at 4 o'clock saying something came up with Serena's family. She paused. I told him you called me afterward, that we ate together, that you said, "He's busy, Maggie. He has his own life now." I stared at the kitchen window. The fog was heavy on the water, the harbor barely visible, the lobster boats just dark shapes moving in and out of the gray. I remembered saying that. I remembered the exact texture of the evening, the half-eaten cake, the leftover pot roast, the particular quiet that settles in a house when you've been waiting for someone who isn't coming. I had chosen that sentence because it was the only one that didn't require me to admit how much the empty chairs hurt. His jaw tightened, Maggie said, the way yours does when you're working something out. He sat with the tea going cold in his hands and didn't say anything for a full minute. She paused. Then he said, he made excuses for me, not a question. Just said it out loud, like he needed to hear it in his own voice to believe it. I pressed my forehead into my hand. The ache in my chest was specific and clean, the ache of something finally being understood by the person who needed to understand it, too late to change what it cost. And the Christmas dinner? I asked. I told him you stood outside the Caldwell house and listened before you went in. That you went in anyway. And that what you were watching for at that dinner table was whether Daniel would step in. How did he take it? Maggie's answer came slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't say it wasn't fair, or that he would have done differently if he'd known. Her voice was quiet. He just said very quietly, like a man setting something heavy down, he wasn't wrong, was he? Not a question, an answer. My throat closed so fast it startled me. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles going white. I had spent months preparing for every version of Daniel's reaction. Anger, denial, bargaining. The version I had not prepared for was this: my son sitting in my neighbor's kitchen, saying those words with the quiet conviction of a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. Harold, Maggie's voice went gentle. He asked me something else. Tell me, he asked, did my father know I wasn't going to come on his birthday before it happened? Did he already know? Maggie paused. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I think your father stopped being surprised a long time before January 19th. I let out a breath that had been sitting in my chest for months. There it was, the full truth spoken out loud by Maggie Cooper over a cup of tea in Nashville. Delivered not with cruelty, but with the gentleness of someone who knows the person receiving it is capable of bearing it. Thank you, I said, for saying it like that. He was ready, she said simply. Did he ask where I am? He asked. I told him I didn't know. That was the truth, Harold. You only told me Maine. You didn't give me an address. I know. That was intentional. Maggie's voice held something careful, not reproach, not agreement. The neutrality of a person who loves you and has opinions about your choices and has decided for now to keep them to herself. He drove away slowly when he left, like a man who had just realized he was lost and wasn't sure yet which direction to start walking. After I hung up, I put on my coat and walked along the harbor. The cold was clean, and the fog was still lifting, and the water made that low, constant sound against the rocks I had come to rely on the way other people rely on music or prayer. I walked until my legs ached, and I had processed every piece of what Maggie had told me, not just the facts, but the full weight of what it meant that my son had sat in a kitchen and said he wasn't wrong and genuinely meant it. This wasn't over. Not ended, not resolved, but it was moving in a direction that was not the same as where it had been, and that for now was enough. Thomas called on a Tuesday evening. It was the only call he made to me in all those months, which told me before he said a single word that what he had to say was something he couldn't summarize in a text message. Thomas Hayes had been economical with words since I'd known him. When he chose to use more than necessary, it meant something. "He came to Carol first," Thomas said. "Then he came to me." I set down the book I'd been reading and gave the phone my full attention. "Tell me how Carol handled it," I said. "Professionally," Thomas said, with the dry precision that was his version of humor. "She laid it out the way she lays out everything clearly, completely, without editorial comment." A pause. "Harold, hearing you describe it and watching Daniel receive it are two entirely different experiences." "The will," I said. He read the full filing. "Second Sunrise Foundation receives the entirety of your personal estate. No portion to Daniel." A beat. "Then Carol handed him the note you left with it." I knew the note by heart. 3 drafts, each shorter than the last, until what remained was the only sentence that was entirely true. "For the fathers who weren't as lucky as I was, at least I had someone to lose." "Carol said he read it twice," Thomas continued. "Then he set it down very carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure what to do with your hands. He sat without speaking for a long time. She said he looked like a man reading a document that explained something he'd sensed for years, but never seen written down." I pressed my hand against my sternum and breathed through the ache. "The company," I said. "Mitchell and Sons has never carried Daniel's name in any ownership document. Not since October 2022. Carol told him the restructuring took place 2 months after his wedding. She did not explain why. She didn't need to." "Did he ask?" "He didn't ask," Thomas said. "I think he already knew. Some part of him he'd been quieting for a long time." A pause. "Carol also gave him Serena's envelope." I thought about Serena reading that letter written directly to her, not through Daniel, because she had never, as far as I could tell, been the author of what had happened. "I never blamed you. But the man you're living with is not the son I raised. I hope one day he finds his way back to himself. When he does, I hope you're still there." "She's keeping it," I said. It wasn't a question. "She's keeping it," Thomas confirmed. "What about the trust for the child?" "Active. Accessible at 18, no behavioral conditions." Thomas paused. Daniel sat very still when he heard that. Carol said he looked like a man receiving news that required a category he didn't have yet. "He came to you after Carol," I said. "He did. He walked in looking like a man who had just read every document in his own life story for the first time. I told him the truth about my role. I didn't soften it. He asked whether I had helped you plan it, and I said yes. I told him you called me the night of your birthday, that you had already decided, and that I helped you do it cleanly." "How did he react?" "He asked why I helped you instead of warning him." Thomas's voice was careful. "I told him because you didn't ask Daniel. In 11 years, you never asked your father how he was doing in a way that required a real answer. Some questions, if you don't ask them, stop being available." The silence on the line was complete. "You said that to him," I said. "He needed to hear it from someone who wasn't you. Sometimes the truth lands differently when it comes from outside the wound." Outside the cottage window, the Maine night was full dark, no moon, just the water below and the wind through the birch trees. "Did he seem like he genuinely understood?" I asked. "He sat in his car for 15 minutes after he left," Thomas said quietly. "Didn't make any calls, didn't look at his phone, just sat there." A pause. "Harold, your son is beginning to grieve you while you're still alive." The words moved through me like cold water, clarifying, sharp and clean. "That's a strange thing to hear," I said. "Strange," Thomas agreed. "But not a bad thing. He'll hire someone to find you. It's only a matter of time." "I know," I said. "I'll stay one step ahead and wait until he's ready, not just desperate." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I'll call when there's more to know." "Thank you, Thomas, for all of it." 40 years, he said simply. "That's what 40 years is for." By April, I had been in Maine long enough to know the name of the woman who runs the bakery on Elm Street, the best time to walk the harbor, before the tourists arrived, and the particular shade of gray the Atlantic turns on a Thursday morning in early summer. I also knew Daniel was getting closer. Thomas had told me in March that Daniel hired Marcus Reed, a private investigator out of Charlotte Avenue in Nashville. Thomas delivered the news the way he always did, plainly, without decoration, giving me exactly what I needed, and nothing extra. I thanked him. I was not surprised. I had known my son would do this. I had counted on it the way a chess player counts on the opponent making the move that was always available to them. What I had also done quietly in January before I boarded the flight north was plan for it. Not because I want credit, but because what I did was not running. It was not hiding. It was a deliberate act by a man who understood his son well enough to know exactly how that son would respond, and who decided carefully what he wanted that response to find. Thomas called on a Wednesday morning in April. I was on the harbor path when my phone buzzed. Marcus Reed filed his preliminary report last week, Thomas said. He traced the flight to Portland. He has Rockport. Harold, he has the address of the cottage. I stopped walking. The harbor was to my left, boats at the dock, the smell of salt and diesel, a gull working the water 30 yards out. I let the information settle. How long, I asked? A week, maybe 10 days before Daniel books a flight. I calculated quickly. Ruth, my landlord, a retired school teacher who asked no questions and made excellent blueberry jam, had a week's notice coming. I had already identified a second cottage further north, smaller, closer to the water, in a town with a name nobody in Nashville would recognize. I had identified it in February when I first understood that Rockport was a breadcrumb rather than a destination. I'll be gone before he lands, I said. Harold. Thomas's voice shifted. Are you sure this is still the right move, staying ahead of him? Ask me what you're actually asking, Thomas. Is there a point where staying gone stops being a statement and starts being stubbornness? I started walking again slowly. A fair question. Thomas always asked fair questions. That was the thing about a friend who had known you 40 years. He could see the difference between your principles and your pride, and he was not afraid to point at the wrong one. If Daniel finds me because he hired someone and flew to Maine in a panic, I said, then nothing has changed. He gets his father back because he was scared, not because he understood what he did and chose to be different. In another 5 years, we're back in the same kitchen. I paused. I need him to find himself first. Then he can find me. Thomas went quiet long enough that I knew he was genuinely thinking it over. All right, he said. What do you want me to tell him if he comes to me again? That I'm well, I said. That's enough. I left Rockport on a Sunday morning before the week Thomas had warned me about was even half over. I said goodbye to Ruth over coffee in her kitchen. She had that particular Maine quality of respecting other people's business, completely asking nothing, offering what was needed. I left her a small envelope with a photograph inside and instructions to give it to any man who came asking for Harold Mitchell. Then I drove north. The new cottage was 11 miles up the coast. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that caught the morning sun, a porch, looking out over a cove where lobster boats went out before dawn. The landlord was a retired fisherman named Bert, who communicated in nods and charged by the month. I found him entirely restful. I settled in quietly, learning the rhythms of the place. The cove, the tides, the fog that sat in the trees some mornings until nearly noon. I read more. I cooked better than I had in years. I started writing in a notebook, not a journal, just words and thoughts, the things that surface when you have enough silence to hear yourself think. One morning in June, a lobsterman named George sat down across from me at the harbor shop and said, "You look like a man who used to carry something heavy." I told him that was accurate. He nodded. We drank our coffee, and he told me about a storm in 1987 that took out half the dock, and I told him about Chell and Sons' first commercial contract that same year. By the end, we were laughing about things that happened before either of us expected our lives to look the way they did. He took a photograph without asking me at the table by the window, coffee in hand, laughing. I looked at it and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, because I looked free. The version of Harold Mitchell that had existed before 11 years of Christmas parties and birthday tables set for 3. I printed the photo and put it in an envelope addressed to Ruth, with a note for Harold Mitchell's son when he comes. The truest thing I could tell Daniel about where I wasn't an address. It was that photograph. A man laughing by a harbor window. A man who had found something he hadn't known he'd lost. Thomas called on a Tuesday morning in August. Something in the timing made my hand tighten on the mug before I answered. "Harold," Thomas said. "Serena had the baby, August 14th, 5 weeks early. Both of them are home and healthy." I exhaled slowly. "Boy or girl?" "Boy. They named him James Harold Mitchell." I set the mug down and gripped the railing. James, my father's name. Harold, mine. Both of them given to a boy stubborn enough to arrive 5 weeks early and survive it. I pressed my hand over my eyes and let the feeling move through me without trying to manage it. "He's a good father," Thomas said when I could speak. "Present, careful. He looks at that baby the way you used to look at him, Harold." I sat down on the porch step and stayed there a long time. The lobster boats moved in the cove. The light came across the water. Somewhere in Nashville, a boy named James Harold Mitchell was sleeping in a house where his father was learning what it meant to be present. Then I went inside, sat at the writing desk, and opened the notebook. It was time to write the letter. I woke up at 6:15, the way I always do. For a moment, just a moment, in that particular softness between sleep and full waking, I didn't know where I was. Then I heard the water, the Atlantic pushing against the rocks below the cove with its low, constant, indifferent voice. And I remembered. Maine. The small cottage. The porch that faced east. The writing desk in the corner where I had spent the last 5 months working on the thing I was going to do this morning. 69 years old today. I got up, made coffee the way I always made it, 1 cup black in the heavy ceramic mug Clara from the bakery had given me in September, when I mentioned I'd never owned a mug I actually liked the feel of. She handed one across the counter the next morning, without a word, charged me nothing, and waved off my attempt to pay with the dismissiveness of a person who has decided a kindness is already done. I took the coffee to the writing desk. The letter was there. I had finished it 6 weeks ago, written the final version, on a November evening when the first real cold came off the water and the cottage smelled like wood smoke. I had read it back 3 times, changed 2 words, folded it, put it in an envelope, written Daniel's name and address on the front in my best handwriting, and set it on the desk. I had been looking at it for 6 weeks, not because I didn't know what it said, not because I wasn't sure I wanted to send it, but because I had promised myself back in August on the porch step with my hands over my face that I would wait until his birthday, January 19th, to send it. Give Daniel 5 months with his son before the letter arrived. 5 months to be a father before he had to think about what kind of son he'd been. I thought that was the right amount of time. I picked up the envelope. 1 page inside. Not long. I had learned over 69 years that the most important things are always short. Contracts and proposals run to 50 pages. The things that actually matter fit on 1. I read it one last time. "Daniel, you gave me 2 choices. I found a third. I hope one day you find yours. The ring stays with you. The photo stays with you. Everything I built with these 2 hands, the part that matters is already inside you, whether you claim it or not. Tell James about his grandmother. Tell him she planted an oak tree from a sapling, and it grew taller than the house. Tell him she made a green bean casserole that nobody liked but her, and she made it every single year because love isn't about whether anyone deserves it. That's all I've got, son. The rest is yours to figure out. Dad, I put it back in the envelope. I put on my coat, the heavy canvas one dark green bought at a shop on Main Street in October because my Nashville jacket was not built for Maine winters, and I had finally accepted that I lived here now. I picked up the envelope and walked out the front door. The morning was cold. Clean and sharp, the air carrying salt, and the smell of low tide and the quiet of a January coast before the town wakes up. My breath came out in small, white clouds. The path to the post office was 15 minutes along the water. I had walked it hundreds of times in the past 11 months, and I knew every uneven board, every bench, every gap in the seawall where the wind came through hardest. I walked it slowly this morning. I thought about Margaret. She would have been 66 this year. She would have stood at the window looking at the water and said, I knew exactly what she would have said, could hear her voice the way you can only hear a voice you've listened to for 30 years. Harold, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She said that about a lot of things. A good meal, a morning with the light, right, a small kindness from a stranger. She had a gift for finding the most beautiful thing in whatever room she was standing in. She would have loved Maine. Agnes ran the post office with the efficiency of someone who had been putting mail in the right boxes since before some of her customers were born. She looked up when I came in, saw the envelope, and said nothing. She understood that some mornings people came in with things they needed to send and didn't require commentary. I handed her the envelope. She weighed it, stamped it, dropped it in the outgoing bin. I watched it disappear. That was it. Everything I had built toward since the night of my 68th birthday, the legal work, the house sale, the memory box, the video, the flight north, the 5 months of waiting, all of it had moved toward this. One envelope on its way to a man in Nashville who was learning slowly what kind of person he wanted to be. I walked back along the water path. The sun was coming up low and pale without fanfare, just arriving and doing its work. I thought about James Harold Mitchell, 5 months old, named after people he'd never meet. I thought about what it would feel like to hold him someday. I thought about whether I would ever find out. I thought about Daniel reading the letter, sitting at the kitchen table in the early morning, coffee in hand, opening it, reading one page, reading it again. I didn't know what he would do with it. He might call. He might not. He might find his own third option in his own time. That was his to figure out. Back at the cottage, I made a second cup of coffee and sat by the window. The water moved steadily, honestly, entirely itself. 11 months of watching it, and it had never once been anything other than exactly what it was. I looked down at my left hand. The ring on my fourth finger worn since June 14th, 1981, and staying there. Well, I said, out loud, to the water, to Margaret, to the room. Here we are, 69 years old, sitting by a window in Maine, not waiting for anything. Every single thing I had done in the past year had been a choice. The Christmas party, the midnight call to Thomas, the legal documents, the memory box, the one-way ticket, the letter now in the mail. Choices. All of them. Made with both hands the way I had built everything in my life, imperfectly, deliberately, with full knowledge that whatever came next was not guaranteed. I was simply here, and here it turned out was enough. I've told you everything now. An old man, a sold house, a wooden box on a kitchen table, and a letter dropped into a mail bin on a January morning. That's the whole of it. That's my family story. Thomas once told me, God doesn't promise us that the people we love will choose wisely. He only promises that we don't have to carry their choices for them. I held on to that through every hard mile of this past year. I still hold on to it now. If there is anything I want you to take from this grandpa story, from this particular life I've lived and stumbled through, it's this: don't wait. Don't do what I did, spending 11 years setting a table for people who had quietly stopped intending to show up. Telling yourself they were busy, telling yourself next time would be different. The people who deserve a seat at your table will pull up their own chair. You won't have to beg them to come. Value yourself before the world teaches you to, because the world's lesson is always more expensive than you expect. I am not a perfect man. I made mistakes I can't undo, and I made peace with a few I can. That, I think, is the most any of us can honestly manage. This has been my grandpa's story. One version of one family story that I hope left something useful behind. If any part of Harold Mitchell's journey stayed with you, if you've ever been the invisible one in the room or the one who finally chose the third option, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone you know needs to hear this story today, share it with them. It costs you nothing, and it might mean everything to them. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. There's more worth telling. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very last word. One final note. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely to carry a human truth. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Choose what speaks to you and take good care of yourself.